You ever get that feeling on New Year's Eve that something isn't quite right? That quiet moment before the clock strikes 12, when the world holds its breath and shadows feel just a little too close. Tonight, we're diving into stories that will make you think twice about celebrating the new year. Tales that blur the line between ordinary and something far more unsettling. Each one is real, each one is bone-chilling, and they all share that creeping fear that lingers long after midnight passes. But before we step into the darkness, make sure you hit subscribe, give this video a like, and share it with anyone brave enough to hear these stories. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to hear your voice as we explore the unknown together. All right, let's get started. I remember that New Year's Eve like it was yesterday, though I wish I could forget it. My friends and I had decided to rent an old house on the edge of town, the kind that seemed charming in pictures but unsettling in person. It sat on a narrow dirt road surrounded by dense woods that swallowed the edges of the property, and we were told the nearest neighbor was miles away. At first, the isolation was part of the appeal. We'd brought music, food, and the kind of excitement only a New Year's Eve away from the city could offer. The house itself was a relic: weathered wood, cracked windows, and an antique grandfather clock that dominated the living room. Its presence was oddly comforting at first, a reminder of simpler times, until midnight came and everything shifted. The evening had been lively. Laughter echoed off the walls, the fire crackled in the old stone hearth, and outside, the faint smell of frost in the air mingled with the scent of cider and pine from inside. We were joking, playing card games, recounting the year's events, the ordinary kind of stories you tell when you're trying to forget the world outside. As the clock inched toward 12, someone suggested we all gather around it for a countdown. Glasses were raised, voices synchronized, and then it happened. The clock struck 12. Only it didn't just chime once. It chimed twice, then 3 times, and each strike felt heavier, more deliberate than the last. We laughed nervously at first, assuming it was a mechanical glitch. Antique clocks weren't known for their precision after all. But as the chimes continued, repeating in a strange, irregular pattern, the atmosphere in the room began to change. At first, it was subtle. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch just a little too far, bending around the furniture in ways that didn't align with the firelight. I thought I was imagining it, a trick of the flickering flames against the cracked walls. Then I noticed the music. Our playlist was looping, but it skipped in odd, unnatural intervals, stretching some notes while cutting others short. I looked at my friends, trying to laugh it off, but they were tense too, a quiet unease settling over us that no one could shake. And then, beneath all of that, there was the smell. Something rotting, sour and metallic, mixing with the scent of pine and cider. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and it made the back of my neck prickle. Each chime brought more changes. A picture frame, one we hadn't touched, was crooked. A chair shifted slightly, angled just enough that it made the space feel unfamiliar. I could swear I heard a whisper, low and almost polite, brushing past my ear. But when I asked, my friends heard nothing, saw nothing. I felt a chill settle deep into my chest, a creeping dread that seemed to grow with each passing second. It wasn't loud, not a scream or a sudden movement, but it was there. The sense that the house itself was aware of us, that it was waiting and that we were intruding. I tried to leave. I made for the door, telling myself it was just a trick of the old wood settling, maybe nerves playing on my imagination. But when I stepped into the hallway, it stretched unnaturally. What had been a short walk to the front door became a winding corridor, long and narrow, the walls closing in just enough to make my stomach turn. Every time I tried to open the door, it felt like the distance from where I stood to the threshold doubled. Panic began to seep in, quiet at first, then insistent, like cold water climbing up my spine. My friends were calling my name, voices tinged with worry and confusion, but the hallway seemed to swallow them, muffling their words until they were nothing more than distant echoes. I returned to the living room, hoping to ground myself with something familiar. The clock had chimed again. 12, as if we had never even counted down. And then, again and again. Each strike came with its own subtle shift. A shadow moved in the corner. A book fell off a shelf we hadn't touched. The faint creak of footsteps above us, though no one was up there. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The firelight danced against the walls, but it felt wrong. Too bright, too thin, as if it barely touched the edges of the room. I realized that some part of me was expecting this night to end, that the cycle of midnight would break, but it never did. Each chiming of 12 was a trap, a loop I couldn't escape, and the weight of that realization pressed down on me harder than the cold could. Hours must have passed, though I couldn't be certain. Time itself felt broken, warped around that room. The normal sounds of a New Year's Eve outside, distant fireworks, car horns, shouts of celebration, were muted, swallowed by the walls of the house. And in their place, there was only repetition and watching. I could feel it, subtle at first, then undeniable. We weren't alone in the perception of the house. Something observed the changes we didn't notice, tracked the shifts in our movements, the small flickers of fear crossing our faces. It didn't rush. It didn't make a sound. It simply waited, and in its patience, it was infinitely worse than any shout or bang. I tried to speak, to force the moment into normality. "It's just a house," I said aloud, my voice cracking. My friends nodded, but I could see the tension in their eyes, the same quiet terror I felt. That night, we realized how small and fragile we were in comparison to something we couldn't even name. Something that simply existed, patient and undisturbed, while we flailed against a looping, fractured reality. The warmth of the fire couldn't reach the corners. The cider couldn't dull the chill crawling along our spines, and laughter had died somewhere between the first repeat of the chimes and the third. Eventually, I stopped trying to measure time. I stopped trying to understand it. Midnight came again and again, and I couldn't remember what number it had struck the first time or whether it mattered. I sank to the floor by the hearth, staring into the flames, counting heartbeats instead of seconds. My friends did the same, too scared to speak, too aware that speaking might draw attention. The house was quiet in those moments, the silence suffocating, heavy, alive in a way that was impossible to describe. I could feel eyes on me from every shadow, and the thought of turning my back or moving toward the door felt like a betrayal of some unspoken rule we had unknowingly broken. Somewhere in the endless repetition, a small shift occurred. I saw it first. A faint movement in the window across the yard, beyond the porch light. Something passed by, slow and deliberate, leaving no footprints in the snow. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but my voice caught in my throat. The house seemed to tighten, as if aware I had noticed, as if the walls themselves pressed in to remind me of my place. I tried to explain it to my friends, but they hadn't seen it. Or perhaps they were too terrified to acknowledge it. I was left staring, frozen, heart-hammering, listening to the chime that would never end. When the first light of dawn finally touched the horizon, It didn't bring relief. The house still felt wrong, the hallway still stretched, and I couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. We left in silence, each of us packing hastily, eyes darting toward shadows, ears straining for whispers we half hoped weren't real. Driving away, the woods seemed endless, the trees lining the road like silent sentinels, and the house receded into the morning mist, small and unassuming. But I knew somehow it wasn't gone. The repetition lingered in my mind, a faint echo behind every tick of every clock since. Midnight isn't meant to be celebrated in that place. Some nights are meant to be endured. And some houses are meant to trap you in ways you'll never fully understand. Even now, years later, when New Year's Eve comes around, I feel the pull of that house, the memory of the endless chiming, the slow, stretching hallway, and the quiet, watching presence in the corners. I never celebrate it the same way anymore. I never count down. And sometimes, when the clock strikes 12 in another house, in another town, I swear I can hear that same hollow echo, a reminder that some midnights are not for joy, but for waiting, patient, deliberate, and very much alive. I was alone in my apartment that New Year's Eve, the kind of alone you only get in a small Appalachian town after everyone's gone to bigger places to celebrate. The building was old, built sometime in the 1940s for mill workers who no longer existed, and it sat at the edge of town where the road narrowed and the woods crept close. I'd lived there long enough to know its sounds, the groan of pipes, the way the wind rattled the loose window panes, but that night felt different from the start. Outside, fireworks popped faintly over the hills, their echoes swallowed by the cold winter air. Inside, it was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like the building itself was holding its breath. I was sitting on the couch watching the clock on my phone tick closer to midnight. 11:57, 11:58. That's when the knock came. It wasn't loud. Just 3 soft, deliberate taps on my door. The kind that makes you think someone knows exactly how much noise they want to make. I froze, listening, waiting for footsteps in the hallway, but there were none. I told myself it was probably a neighbor, maybe someone drunk, maybe a joke, but something about the timing made my stomach tighten. I stood slowly and looked through the peephole. The hallway light flickered weakly, illuminating stained carpet and peeling paint. No one was there. I opened the door just enough to look down both ends of the hall. Empty. The building was dead quiet again. I shut the door, annoyed at myself for feeling scared over nothing, and turned back toward the living room. That's when the knock came again. Louder this time. Closer. It felt like it came from the inside of the door instead of the other side. My chest tightened, and I stood there staring at the wood grain, half expecting it to move. After a few seconds, I cracked the door open again. The hallway was still empty, but this time there was a folded piece of paper on the floor right in front of my door. I didn't hear anyone leave. I hadn't heard footsteps. It was just there. I picked it up with shaking hands and unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, like whoever wrote it had been in a hurry or wasn't used to holding a pen. It said, "You shouldn't be here at midnight." No signature. No explanation. Just that one sentence. I laughed quietly, more out of panic than humor, and told myself it was a prank. Maybe kids from town. Maybe someone I didn't recognize. Still, I locked the deadbolt and leaned against the door, listening. The apartment felt colder suddenly, like the heat had shut off. I walked to the thermostat, but it was still running. As I turned back toward the living room, the lights flickered, just once. Then again. The air felt heavy, thick, and I realized I could hear something faint beneath the hum of the heater, whispering, Not voices exactly, more like breath sliding through narrow spaces. It sounded like it was coming from the walls. I pressed my ear against the dry wall, heart pounding, and the whispering stopped instantly. When I pulled away, it started again, softer this time, almost careful. My phone buzzed in my hand as the clock ticked to 11:59. Each second felt louder than the last, like the sound was echoing inside my skull. I decided I wasn't staying. I grabbed my keys and coat and moved toward the door, but as soon as my hand touched the knob, I felt pressure, firm, invisible, pushing back against my chest. Not pain, not force, just resistance, like walking into deep water. I tried again, harder, and the pressure increased, squeezing the air out of my lungs until I stepped back, gasping. The whispering grew louder, closer, and I could almost make out words, though none of them made sense. Panic set in. I tried the back door that led to the fire stairs. Same pressure, same invisible wall. The apartment felt smaller now, the ceiling lower, the walls closer. I backed into the living room, breathing fast, eyes darting to every shadow. The clock on my phone changed to 12:00. The moment it did, the knocking started again. Not on the door this time, from the bedroom wall. Slow, deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. I stood frozen, unable to move, watching the wall like it might split open. The whispering stopped, replaced by a low shuffling sound, like someone moving carefully through a tight space. I thought about the building then. How old it was, how many people had lived and died there, how close the woods pressed in around it. Folks around town liked to talk about things that lived between places, things that followed people home when the year turned over. I'd always laughed it off as mountain superstition. Standing there in that apartment, listening to something move where nothing should have been, it didn't feel funny anymore. The knocking moved, from the bedroom wall to the hallway wall, then the kitchen. Always slow, always deliberate, like it was circling me. I sank onto the couch, covering my ears. But I could still feel it. Vibrations through the floor, through the cushions, through my bones. The air smelled wrong too, damp and earthy, like turned soil after rain. At some point, I realized the knocking wasn't random. It was following the layout of the apartment, tracing the path between walls, getting closer. I started to cry, quietly, ashamed but unable to stop. I whispered apologies to no one, promising I'd leave, promising I wouldn't stay. The pressure lifted for just a second, enough to make me gasp, and I ran for the door. My hand hit the knob, and this time it turned. The door swung open, and I stumbled into the hallway, nearly falling. The hall was darker than before, the lights barely working, shadows pooling in the corners. I took 2 steps forward and froze. At the far end of the hallway, where the exit stairs should have been, something shifted. Not a person exactly. More like a shape that didn't fully belong there, hunched and wrong, pressed too close to the walls. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking at me. The pressure returned instantly, slamming me back into my apartment and pulling the door shut behind me. The lock clicked on its own. The knocking stopped. The whispering stopped. The apartment went completely silent. I don't remember much after that. I woke up on the couch hours later, daylight creeping through the blinds. The apartment felt normal again. Cold, but normal. My phone said it was January 1st. No missed calls. No messages. The note was gone. I checked the hallway. Nothing. No neighbors remembered knocking. No one else heard anything. I moved out a week later. I don't celebrate New Year's Eve anymore. I don't stay alone in empty buildings. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear soft knocking in the walls of wherever I'm living. Always 3 taps, always patient. And every time midnight comes around, I feel that same invisible pressure in my chest, like something is waiting to see if I'll still be there when the year changes. I don't think I'll ever forget that New Year's Eve. My cousin had invited me out to his family cabin, way up in the mountains, the kind of place you drive to for hours and all the roads narrow until they vanish into nothing but snow and dark pines. He promised it would be peaceful. Snow falling soft against the roof, a roaring fireplace, the quiet you can't get in the city. I wanted that. I needed it. I hadn't expected anything like what happened. The drive up was easy enough, but there's this one stretch where the road hugs the side of a ridge and the trees press close, heavy with frost. The headlights caught ice on the branches, and it made the whole forest glow faintly green and white. But there was a hollow stillness to it, the kind that made every snap of a branch sound like it was right behind you. I chalked it up to nerves. I was tired, and the city's noise had made me jumpy. My cousin laughed when I mentioned it, tossing his coat onto the passenger seat. "It's just the woods talking," he said, but even his voice had that nervous edge I didn't want to hear. The cabin itself was small, made of dark logs, with a single chimney that smoked lazily into the night. The snow outside was ankle-deep, soft, untouched, except for our own tracks. Inside, it smelled like old wood and pine, and the fire threw shadows that danced along the walls. We ate, drank some cheap beer, and told each other stories that got softer as the clock crept toward midnight. I should have gone to bed earlier, but I was restless, drawn to the window that looked out over the frozen clearing behind the cabin. The forest stretched endlessly, black and heavy, a wall of pines with snow collecting in the branches like powdered sugar. Around 11:50, I saw it, a faint flicker of light in the cabin across the clearing. My heart thudded hard. I didn't know anyone could be there. The cabin was abandoned, or at least everyone said it had been. At first, I told myself it was a reflection from our own fire, dancing on the snow, tricking me. But then, the lights moved. One window to another, back and forth. Slow, deliberate, almost like someone was pacing. I pressed my face closer to the cold glass, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the shadows. My cousin noticed me staring. "What is it?" he asked, tilting his head, trying to see the other cabin. I shrugged, forcing a laugh. Probably just a reflection, old glass, firelight. But I couldn't shake it. There was a rhythm to those flickers, like a heartbeat. My stomach sank as I realized it wasn't random. Minutes passed. I kept my eyes on the windows, and then, just as the second hand of our old kitchen clock approached 12, I saw a figure, just a silhouette at the edge of the tree line where the snow met the dark forest. It was tall, hunched slightly, just standing there, watching. I froze. My cousin froze. The only sound was the fire, crackling, and our breathing, heavy and quick. The figure didn't move. It didn't even blink, though I couldn't see its face. Then the lights in the cabin vanished. I swear I saw the figure shift slightly, like it had noticed us. And then, it too disappeared. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it had been a trick of the shadows, a tree limb shifting in the wind, but that thought didn't last long. Soon after, I started hearing knocks. Slow, deliberate, not at the door, not exactly. Against the walls of the cabin, low and steady, almost patient, like someone testing us. My cousin grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed, whispering curses, eyes wide. We sat in the living room, the fire between us like a fragile shield, listening as the sound repeated. Every knock was followed by silence, then another, always in the same slow rhythm. I got up, heart hammering, and pressed my ear to the door. The snow outside was untouched, no footprints, But the knocking continued, now coming from the side of the cabin that faced the forest. My breath fogged against the cold window as I peered out, and there was nothing. The snow was perfect, clean, no sign that anyone had been near us. And yet, I knew we weren't alone. I could feel it. That moment, the second you realize the dark isn't just absence, it's something waiting, was suffocating. The night stretched long. Every shadow in the cabin seemed alive. The fire's light carved shapes into the walls, limbs, crouching figures, faces that weren't there, but every time I blinked, they were gone. I tried to keep myself busy, chopping wood for the stove, cleaning up dishes, anything. But then I heard movement in the attic. Not footsteps, more like scraping, slow, careful, deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't running, they weren't clumsy, they were moving with intention. My cousin refused to go up there, shaking his head. "It's probably just the wind," he said. But his voice didn't convince me. Hours passed like this. I would drift to sleep in fits, waking to the faintest sound, a creak in the floor, the scratching of nails on wood, whispers carried on the wind. And then I heard it. Breathing. Outside, close, slow and ragged. I pressed my face against the window, snow crunching softly beneath. Nothing. Just the forest, the trees leaning like sentries in the darkness. But I could feel it, the weight of eyes on us. I slept sitting in a chair by the fire, bat in hand, eyes flicking to every shadow, every movement outside the glass. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke to the sound of the front door handle turning slowly. My cousin was frozen, his hand gripping mine. The knob moved once, twice, and stopped. Then, silence. I thought I imagined it. Maybe I had. But when I looked out the window again, something caught my eye. A shadow just beyond the tree line, crouched, watching, unmoving. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, raw with fear. The shadow didn't flinch, it didn't move, it just waited. Dawn finally came, pale and weak, creeping over the treetops. The first light revealed nothing. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. The snow was untouched, like the night hadn't happened at all. We didn't talk much on the way down. My cousin kept glancing over his shoulder, eyes wide, and I couldn't stop thinking about that figure, crouched at the edge of the woods, waiting for the night to return. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see the lights in that abandoned cabin, moving as though someone, or something, was pacing. I can feel the slow knocking on the walls, deliberate and patient, testing me, testing us, to see how we would react. The forest seems alive to me now, in a way it never had before. It waits, it watches, and it doesn't forget. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a drifter, someone hiding from the world, or maybe an animal somehow mimicking human movement. But the figure at the tree line, the way the lights moved inside a cabin that had been empty for years, that I cannot explain. I don't want to. Some part of me knows that if I understood it, it would only make it more real. New Year's Eve now holds no appeal for me. I avoid the mountains, the forests, anything that might bring me back to that clearing. But sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, when the wind rattles the window panes and shadows flicker across the walls, I swear I hear slow knocks, deliberate and patient, as though testing the door. And I remember the way the forest seemed to breathe around the cabin, alive in a way that was patient, quiet, and hungry. I never went back. I've told the story a dozen times, to friends, to strangers, anyone who will listen, and they all ask the same thing. Why didn't you leave that night? I don't have an answer. Fear doesn't always make sense. Some part of me thinks we stayed because leaving too soon would have meant acknowledging that whatever was out there had chosen to watch us, and admitting that might have made it real. I haven't celebrated another New Year's Eve since. I can't. The memory is too vivid. I see those lights flickering across the snow, pacing like a heartbeat, and I remember the figure crouched at the edge of the tree line, watching, waiting. I can still hear the slow knocks on the cabin walls in the quiet moments, and I know that night wasn't over. Not really. Some part of it is still out there, in the forest, in the dark, patient. And maybe one day it will test another cabin, another person who thinks they're safe. And that thought is enough to keep me awake, sometimes for hours, staring at the shadows in my own room, listening for the knocks that never come, but might. I was home alone that New Year's Eve, and the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every creak in the floorboards sound like someone walking across the room behind you. My parents had gone to a distant cousin's cabin, somewhere deeper in the mountains where cell service was spotty and the roads narrowed to nothing more than ruts and rocks. I'd stayed behind, thinking a quiet evening scrolling through old photos on my phone would be enough company until midnight. But even before the sun fully set, the shadows in the corners of my living room seemed to move in ways they shouldn't, stretching unnaturally along the walls, shifting with the rhythm of the dying light outside. The TV was off. There was no music. Nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the floorboards above. I tried to focus on my photos, flipping through years of memories, some happy, some painful. Faces of friends I hadn't seen in ages, birthdays long forgotten, nights where the laughter had felt warm and safe. I lingered over one from last New Year's Eve, the one with everyone piled on the couch, champagne in hand, faces glowing in the soft light of the living room. I laughed quietly to myself, a hollow sound that didn't seem to fill the room at all. Then I realized I could hear something else, a faint, almost imperceptible thump from the kitchen. My heart jumped, and I told myself it was the fridge settling. Maybe just a branch against the window. But even as I murmured reassurances, the feeling of being watched began to creep along my spine. Slow and insistent, like the crawl of cold water under my skin. It was 11:59 when the first call came. My phone buzzed against the coffee table, a number I didn't recognize flashing on the screen. Curiosity overcame my unease, and I swiped to answer. Nothing. Just silence. No static, no background noise, no heavy breathing. Just a quiet, hollow absence, like the air itself had thickened inside the receiver. I said hello, my voice sounding strange and small, swallowed by the stillness. The line clicked, and the call ended. I exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping my throat, telling myself it must be a prank. Someone at work or a friend trying to ruin my quiet night. But the phone buzzed again immediately, insistently. The same number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. There was no signal interference, no dial tone, just the phone, ringing, demanding attention. I answered. This time a voice whispered my name. Low, slow, deliberate, like someone leaning against my ear in the darkness. My chest froze. I couldn't move. The air seemed thicker, and the shadows in the room drew closer, curling along the edges of the furniture, reaching toward me with something that felt more alive than the house itself. I dropped the phone, fumbling for the table as the line went dead. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the cup of tea I'd left half finished. I told myself again it was a joke. Probably a friend with a hacked phone, some kind of preposterous, mean-spirited prank. But before I could even finish the thought, the phone rang again. Now I knew. Dread solidified in my chest, a stone growing heavy with every heartbeat. I didn't even need to look at the screen. I knew the number. That same number, impossible, like the shadows in the corners, repeating themselves over and over. When I answered this third time, it wasn't a live voice anymore. It was me. My own voice, slow and warped, repeating over and over. You shouldn't be alone. You shouldn't be alone. You shouldn't be alone. The sound twisted against my oars, warping the familiarity of my own tone into something monstrous. I slammed the phone onto the table, but the words didn't stop. They echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls, the ceiling, the floor, growing louder, overlapping. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I pressed my palms over my ears, trying to block it, but it wasn't just the phone anymore. The sound had escaped, had become something larger, something in the room with me. I stumbled back, crashing into the couch, my eyes darting to the windows, to the dark hallway leading to the bedrooms, trying to convince myself there was nothing there, but the air felt wrong, thick and wet with tension, like the forest outside on a winter night when the wind presses against your back and something unseen rustles the leaves. Then I noticed it, my reflection in the living room window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the glow from the street lamp behind the house reflecting off the glass. But no, it wasn't me. Not exactly. The figure behind me mimicked my movements with uncanny precision. My shrug, my tilt of the head, even the way I stumbled over the couch cushion. But it wasn't me. Not really. I could see the faint outline of its eyes, dark and still, reflecting nothing, but studying me with a kind of patience that no human could sustain. Panic clawed at my throat, making it hard to breathe. I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty, but when I turned back, the reflection remained, now shifting independently, grinning ever so slightly, mocking the fear that had rooted me to the spot. I grabbed the phone and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall with a sharp crack, the screen shattering into jagged pieces. I pressed my hands over my face, expecting the voice to stop now that the source was destroyed. But it didn't. The whispers continued, threading through the walls, the ceiling, somewhere in the very air itself. They moved with me when I ran to the kitchen, and when I pressed my back to the refrigerator, they came from behind, from below, from above. It was everywhere, filling the house like water in a well, cold and rising. My own voice whispered back at me in fragments, "You shouldn't be alone." Over and over until the words were no longer distinguishable as speech, but as a feeling, a pulse of malice that pressed into my chest. The clock ticked closer to midnight, slow, deliberate. Each second stretched into eternity. My hands were raw from clawing at my ears, my legs numb from crouching, my mind looping over every terrifying possibility. Someone had to be in the house. Maybe the air ducts, maybe the attic, maybe the shadows themselves had teeth. I couldn't call anyone. My parents were hours away, and the cell signal was dead except for that cursed number, the voice, the reflection. I felt like I was trapped in a room that was shrinking around me, the walls bending inward, breathing along with me, watching. I wanted to run, to escape, but the front door was just another black rectangle, a potential threshold into the unknown outside where the wind moaned through the trees like a chorus of mourning. Then the calls came faster, overlapping, impossible, multiplying. I could hear my own voice layered in dozens of variations, some frantic, some slow, some mocking, all whispering the same terrifying words. My reflection in the window no longer mimicked me. It moved independently now, leaning toward me, pushing its face against the glass, pressing closer with that grin that didn't belong. I staggered backward, tripping over the rug, hitting my head on the coffee table. Stars bloomed behind my eyes, but I didn't dare close them. I couldn't. The sound, the eyes, the grin, they had to be real. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The clock struck 12. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. The kind that makes you think the world has been swallowed whole. My chest heaved, my head pounding, but I forced myself to move, to breathe, to check every room, every closet, every corner of the house. Nothing. No one. The broken phone lay in pieces on the floor. The reflection in the window was gone. The shadows receded to normal proportions. The air felt like air again, cold but unthreatening. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the knife I'd grabbed from the kitchen just in case. I didn't stay in that house the rest of the night. I drove, without thought or direction, into the darkness, headlights cutting through the mist rolling down the hollow roads. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting that grin, that mimicry, that echo of my own voice. But there was nothing. Only the road, the trees, the occasional flicker of deer along the shoulder. Even then, I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it in the residual cold in my chest, the way the hairs on the back of my neck refused to lie flat, the way the darkness outside the window seemed to thrum with quiet impatience. I haven't been home alone on New Year's Eve since. Not once. Friends invite me to parties, gatherings, small dinners, but I always say no. I sleep with the lights on. I check every corner twice. I keep my phone on silent and out of reach, fearing that same number will flash again. Sometimes, though, late at night, when the wind rattles the window panes just right, or when the house creaks in a particular pattern, I swear I hear it. The faint whisper, slow and deliberate. You shouldn't be alone. I'll never forget the reflection either. Not really. The way it mimicked me perfectly, down to the smallest twitch of my hands, the tilt of my head, the way my body instinctively mirrored its own movements without thought. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It wasn't just my imagination. I know better now, and I know deep in the hollow of my chest that if I were ever truly alone again, it wouldn't just be a reflection. It would be something waiting, something patient, something that doesn't mind waiting for hours, days, even years, to remind you that even the simplest night at home can become unbearable. The house is quiet now when I drive past it during the day, empty, still. But sometimes, when the sun falls behind the ridges and the shadows stretch across the porch, I swear I see movement in the living room window. Not a person, not a shadow, something else, waiting, patient. And I know, no matter how far I run, how many New Year's Eves I spend away from home, the memory of that night, the sound of my own voice echoing against the walls, and the reflection in the glass will never leave me. I haven't been alone on New Year's Eve since, and I never will be. I had always liked to be alone on New Year's Eve. It wasn't about avoiding crowds or noisy celebrations. I just liked the quiet, the way the world seemed to hold its breath before the clock ticked over into something new. That year, I decided to hike out to the ridge that overlooked the outskirts of town, the one spot where you could see the whole valley lit up with fireworks without anyone else around. The snow had started falling lightly the day before, and by the evening it had settled in a crisp, clean blanket that made the trails shine under the moonlight. I strapped on my boots, pulled my jacket tight, and started out, the air so cold it burned the inside of my nose, but smelled of pine and frost. The smell so sharp it felt almost alive. At first, everything was peaceful. The trail was empty. The only sound my own boots crunching over frozen snow and the occasional snap of a branch under its weight. The forest pressed close on either side, dark and heavy. The trees bending slightly under the snow. I remember thinking that this was the perfect escape, the perfect solitude. As I climbed higher, the valley opened up a little, and I could see the faint glimmer of distant lights from the town, the occasional spark of fireworks even before midnight. It felt like being in another world, one untouched by the chaos of human noise. I must have lost track of time because when I glanced at my watch, it was just shy of midnight. 11:45, I think. That's when I noticed them. At first, they were just tiny flickers between the trees, faint and far off, swinging slightly like lanterns held by people walking slowly. My curiosity pulled me toward them. I remember thinking it was strange, because I hadn't seen another person all evening. I told myself they were probably a group of late hikers celebrating the new year early, or maybe just hunters with lamps. But as I got closer, the movements didn't make sense. They weren't walking in a line. They were moving in a circle, almost perfectly, the lights swinging in time, circling something I couldn't see. I stopped, my stomach twisting. I called out, trying to hear some kind of response. "Hey, anyone there?" The lantern stopped moving immediately, almost in unison, and for a moment there was only the faint sound of wind through the pine boughs. Then it started. Faintly at first, almost imperceptible, a soft murmur like the rustling of leaves. But it wasn't wind. It was voices, chanting, soft, low, layered, counting down from 12 over and over, each voice in a slightly different tone, echoing through the trees. 12, 11, 10. The voices overlapped, weaving together in a way that made the numbers feel wrong, impossible. My heart was pounding, my breath coming out in quick clouds, but something about it rooted me in place. I couldn't move, and the forest seemed to bend closer, the snow muffling everything else. Panic finally surged through me, and I tried to turn away, to head back the way I had come. But the path wasn't the same. It didn't look right. Snow that I had passed over now seemed endless, stretched in a way that made me dizzy. Branches that had been at a normal height now bent low like they were reaching for me. And the chanting, it wasn't behind me anymore. It was everywhere. Around me, echoing through the trees, overlapping and warping in ways that made the numbers almost impossible to follow. I ran, my boots slipping in the snow, branches tearing at my jacket and hair, my lungs burning from the cold and effort. I didn't stop running. I don't even know how long I ran, but at some point I thought I heard something else. The faint snapping of twigs that didn't match my own steps. It wasn't close at first, just a whisper of sound behind the roar of my own panic, but it grew. I could feel eyes on me, though I couldn't see anything, the way the forest seemed to hold a gaze that followed my every move. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw nothing but shadows stretching in strange angles across the snow. Finally, after what felt like hours, though it must have been only minutes, the trees thinned, and I burst out onto the main trail, the one I had come in on. The snow was pristine again, undisturbed except for my own footprints, the path empty, silent. No lanterns, no chanting, just snow, the smell of pine and the biting cold that made me shiver uncontrollably. I fell to my knees, gasping, my heart hammering like it might burst through my chest. The ridge above was dark, the sky above a smooth sheet of black interrupted by the faint flicker of distant fireworks. And for a moment, I thought it had all been some hallucination, a trick of my nerves and the cold. I didn't linger. I ran the rest of the way down the trail toward the town, my mind screaming at me to make sense of what had just happened. And yet, every turn, every shadow between the trees seemed to whisper, as if what I had left behind was still following me. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen that night. There's no point. People would think I'd lost my mind, or that I'd been spooked by some harmless hikers. But the memory stayed with me. The backward counting, the voices layering and overlapping in a way that didn't make sense, the circular movement of the lights. It haunted me. Every New Year's Eve, since I've woken with the sound of that countdown in my head. Sometimes in my dreams, I'm back on that trail, the snow crunching underfoot, and the lanterns in the distance swinging slowly. 12, 11, 10. The voices whispering over one another, echoing through the trees, and no matter how fast I run, I can't leave. The forest stretches and twists, the path endlessly extending, the lights following me, the eyes watching. I wake up gasping, heart racing, my sheets damp with sweat, convinced I can still feel their presence in the corners of the room. Shadow that flickers just beyond my vision. The thing that terrifies me most isn't the lights or the chanting or even the impossibility of the path. It's the certainty that somewhere out there, people, or something that moves like them, are waiting, counting backward, preparing for the next midnight. And every year, I can't shake the feeling that they know I'm listening, that they know I remember, and that next year, if I'm not careful, I might hear the countdown in the real world, not just my dreams. It's a dread that lingers in the edges of my life, in the quiet of the house when everyone else is asleep, in the rustle of the wind across the pine boughs outside my window. I've tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was a hallucination, a trick of snow and cold, but it's never gone. Sometimes I catch myself standing at my window, staring out into the darkness of the woods that edge our town, wondering if the lanterns are out there, moving in circles, counting down, waiting. And though I tell myself it's just nerves, just imagination, a part of me knows the truth. I've seen it, I've heard it, and I know deep down that whatever it wasn't done with me. Every year I tell myself I won't go near the trails on New Year's Eve, but the memory keeps pulling me back. That impossible cold, the smell of pine, the feeling of unseen eyes tracking me. And every year, when the clock ticks closer to midnight, I can hear it in my mind again. 12, 11, 10, and I know I'll never truly escape. Even now, years later, the sound lingers. I can feel it under the hum of everyday life, in the quiet moments when nothing else disturbs the air. I can't explain it, and I don't want to, because I think part of the reason it's so terrifying is that it doesn't need to be explained. It just exists, and it waits. Somewhere, it waits. I can feel it, waiting for the next midnight. That New Year's Eve, I found myself in a haze of warmth, laughter, and the lingering tang of smoke and fireworks, gathered at my friend's lake house deep in the Appalachian woods. The house was a weathered structure, a squat, unassuming cabin perched at the edge of a frozen lake, its timbers aged and gray from decades of winter storms. I had never been this far into the mountains before. The road was little more than a narrow ribbon of asphalt, winding between dense evergreens and skeletal oaks whose bare branches scraped against each other in the wind. As we drove in, the sun had long since dipped beneath the ridgeline, and the shadows in the forest seemed to thicken unnaturally fast, swallowing the familiar shapes of the car and the occasional roadside markers. By the time we arrived, night had settled over the lake like a heavy, suffocating blanket, and the only light came from the cabin windows and the flickering glow of a small fire pit on the deck. Inside, the atmosphere was jovial. My friend's family had already begun their annual traditions, passing around flasks of whiskey, exchanging stories of past winters, and teasing one another with half-hearted dares about braving the cold outdoors. I laughed along, but even amid the warmth of the cabin and the chatter of familiar voices, I felt a subtle, persistent edge of unease. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the way the trees pressed against the windows like silent sentinels, or the way the lake lay still and black beyond the deck, swallowing the reflected light of the cabin like some endless pit. Still, I pushed it aside. The house smelled of pine sap, roasting meat, and damp wood, and the laughter around me was infectious. As midnight approached, the group began moving outside, eager to witness the fireworks and countdown. The air had that crisp, metallic edge of winter, the kind that makes your lungs ache and your skin tingle. I followed the others to the deck, where blankets had been spread out over the wooden planks, and we watched as the first faint colors of fireworks blossomed against the night sky, bursting like fragile stars that seemed almost out of place in the dark wilderness. There was a strange contrast, the beauty of the lights above and the oppressive stillness around the lake, a silence so deep that even the usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife seemed absent. I stayed for a few moments, wrapped in a blanket, but the crowd felt too loud, too close, and the warmth too stifling. I needed air, a moment of solitude before the new year rolled in. Without thinking, I slipped away from the group, careful not to draw attention, and made my way down the narrow path to the dock. The wooden planks creaked softly beneath my boots, sending echoes out across the water, though the lake itself remained utterly still, glassy and impossibly dark. The moon hung low and pale, casting a muted silver light across the ice and water, and I breathed in the cold, tasting the sharp, clean winter air. For a moment, I felt a quiet relief in the isolation. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, a trick of shadows thrown by the tree line across the lake. A figure, or at least something roughly humanoid, was pacing along the edge of the trees on the opposite shore. My eyes searched for a logical explanation. A hiker, a neighbor's cabin resident, someone else celebrating quietly in the forest. But the movement was too precise, too deliberate. Each step matched the next perfectly, like the shadow was marking out invisible lines along the underbrush. And there was no sound, no rustle of branches, no cracking of twigs beneath boots, no whisper of cloth. It moved as if the forest itself parted willingly, leaving no trace. A shiver ran down my spine, but I told myself it was nothing, just the low light playing tricks, a reflection in the water, a tree limb swaying unnaturally. I focused on the figure again, trying to convince myself it was someone like me, just someone out for a midnight walk. That's when I noticed the pattern. The figure was mimicking us. I could hear the faint murmur of the countdown beginning back at the cabin, someone shouting, 10, 9, 8, and the shadow seemed to step in perfect rhythm with each number. 10 steps forward, 9 steps, 8. My breath hitched involuntarily, and I could feel the heat rise to my cheeks even in the frigid air. The thought that I might be imagining it crossed my mind, but it didn't make sense. I'd been staring at the tree line for several minutes now, and the shadow's movements were too consistent, too eerily synchronized with the countdown. I realized in that sickening instant that it was not just pacing. It was aware of me. It was aware of us. The way it matched the numbers made it feel intentional, as though it had been watching, waiting, studying. The rational part of my brain fought against the terror clawing up my spine. There was no way it could hear our voices across the lake, right? No way it could follow a countdown whispered into the icy night. And yet, there it was, perfectly in step, perfectly mirrored. I wanted to turn away, to rush back to the warmth of the cabin, but my legs felt locked in place, and my mind refused to abandon the sight. With each number, my panic grew. 7, 6, 5. The moonlight caught the figure's outline in such a way that it was just barely distinguishable from the trees, but enough to see that it was unnervingly upright, almost unnaturally still in posture, and too thin, too long-limbed to be an ordinary person. The seconds stretched, and I could hear the distant laughter and chirrs from the cabin, the counting voices mingling with the crackle of fireworks. And yet here I was, paralyzed by a presence so silent it seemed to absorb all sound. When we reached 1, 0, the figure froze. Not a twitch, not a bend of the arm or shift of weight, just perfect, absolute stillness. It stood at the edge of the tree line like a dark sentinel, watching, For a heartbeat, I felt something almost human in that posture, a hesitant pause, a moment of consideration, and then it was gone. Not running or walking away, not fading into the shadows as one would expect. It simply dissolved as if it had never been there at all, leaving only the empty, frozen lake behind. I blinked, shaking my head, trying to convince myself I had imagined it, that it had been a shadow, a trick of the moon, the reflection of the fireworks bouncing in the black water. But my stomach churned, and the cold seemed to seep deeper into my bones. I turned back toward the cabin, each step back feeling heavier than the last, the wooden planks of the dock groaning underfoot, threatening to betray the sound of my panic. Inside, the room was alive with noise, laughter, chatter, clinking glasses, the crackle of a small fire burning in the hearth. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, about what I had seen, but even as the words formed in my mouth, they felt absurd. I saw a shadow on the other side of the lake. It counted with us. I imagined the faces of my friends smiling politely at my story, nodding, humoring me, while the warmth of the room mocked the cold horror I had just faced. I swallowed hard, said nothing, and tried to rejoin the celebration. But the image refused to leave my mind. Even in the laughter and the noise, I could see the figure at the edge of the tree line, step for step, number for number. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had set up a prank. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my mind had been too sensitive to the isolation and the dark. But none of it fit. The precision, the silence, the way it had seemed to respond to us specifically. There was no logical explanation. I found myself avoiding the windows, the deck, the view of the lake. Every creak of the floorboards or snap of a branch outside made me flinch. I kept my eyes down, my voice low, hoping to lose myself in conversation, but the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to flicker, as if aware of my thoughts. And yet, no one else noticed. No one else felt it. They were safe, warm, unaware, while I carried this secret dread, like a seed planted in my chest, growing and twisting with each passing moment. Sleep came fitfully, if at all. When I closed my eyes, the shadow lingered in my mind, pacing along the tree line, counting along with me in silence. When I drifted into shallow dreams, I could hear faint footsteps outside, echoing in impossible rhythm, though I would wake to find nothing but the faint whisper of the wind through the cabin. Morning brought little comfort. The sun rose pale and weak, filtering through the trees with a ghostly gray light that did nothing to warm or reassure. The lake was empty, still, unbroken. The forest looked harmless in daylight, but I knew better. I had seen something there. I had felt it. In the weeks and months that followed, I tried to move on. I told myself it had been a hallucination, a trick of the mind, the product of isolation and alcohol and too much silence. But every New Year's Eve since, I find myself glancing toward the tree line across the lake, imagining the slow, deliberate steps of that figure, counting along with the fading echoes of a year gone by. I check the windows, the doors, the deck, as if expecting it to reappear, to step out of the shadows once more. The anticipation is worse than fear itself. I've returned to that lake house only once since that night. The memory was too strong, too visceral, but curiosity got the better of me. The dock was cold, the lake still and black, and for a moment I saw nothing. The tree line was quiet, frozen in winter stillness. And then, at the corner of my eye, I caught the faintest movement. A shadow shifting in impossible precision, moving just slightly in time with my own heartbeat. I turned, fully expecting to see nothing, but my stomach sank as I realized the perception of movement lingered even when I faced it head-on. I couldn't explain it. Nothing in the natural world behaved that way. I left immediately. I drove down the winding road back to civilization, the headlights cutting through the dark, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. Even now, months later, the dread is always at the back of my mind when I think of that place. The isolation, the silence, the unnatural rhythm of the shadow. It is imprinted on me, a reminder that the forest, the lake, the dark spaces between trees are not as empty as we like to believe. I've told a few close friends the story, but always with a caveat. Don't ask questions, don't probe too deeply, or you will start seeing it too. People shake their heads, chuckle nervously, call it a story too strange to believe. But I know what I saw. I felt the presence, counted in rhythm with it, and saw it dissolve into nothing at the edge of the tree line. The memory is unshakable, and every year, when the fireworks start and the countdown begins, my mind cannot help but imagine it, pacing, counting, waiting. Even tonight, as I sit here telling this story, I glance toward the forest just outside my window. The wind rattles the bare branches like fingernails against glass, and I can almost imagine the precise, silent steps along the edge of the trees. There is a part of me that wants to go back, to confront the unknown, to finally see it fully. But I know better. Some things are not meant to be confronted. Some presences are not meant to be understood. I am left with the memory, with the dread, with the knowledge that I was not alone in that forest, that night, and perhaps never will be. And every New Year's Eve, when the world celebrates with noise and light, I remember that quiet moment on the dock, the cold moon over the lake, and the counting shadow that moved too deliberately to be natural. And I wait, somewhere between disbelief and fear, for the possibility that it will return.